Namaskar and welcome to this exciting new episode of Sathology Debunking Mythology. Today we are bringing very unique topics here on the ancient historic symbols of India or the historical places of India. One of my questions has been that some of the oldest living cultures in the world has been Indians, and somehow the world is jealous of it because the colonial powers couldn't change that. And therefore, the big jealousy out there, a big propaganda to defame it is there. But I do not want to touch upon that because sometimes we have to highlight the positive side and we need to speak only about the positive side. Enough negative is being said in the media all the time. So at least on this channel, we'll focus on the actual sathology aspect. So before on popular demand, I'm just repeating it. Sat means truth. And when you combine with logos, which is a Latin word, etymologically you have to add an additional T to make it rhyme phonetically correct with the Sanskrit. Becomes satta with the additional ta emphasized on a full ta. So it's called sattology in English as well as in Sanskrit. And the meaning becomes the science or study of truth. So at Sathology, we try to debunk mythology, which means mythology means the science of imagination or a fake or a lie. And mythology word was especially used against the Hindu culture because the British were not able to fathom that something more advanced could exist than them when they were culturally naive and were discovering Renaissance and actually coming out of barbarism of the Church of England. At that time, when they saw the Hindu culture or the Indian culture, they were shocked. So they called it mythology because they couldn't digest it. But anyway, we are debunking that word completely. So for any Vedic history, we call it sathology because it is backed by astronomical proof, archaeological proofs, and also it's a living culture. So these three proofs make it very, very bona fide. So today we're going to cover some interesting aspects of history about three places we're going to cover, which we'll shortly discuss one by one. And we have an amazing author and a prolific writer and a very good speaker, Sri Prashant Pol.
Namaskar.
Namaskar and welcome to the show again. I think your last show was very,
Thank
very
you.
successful. So,
Thanks.
so today, what are we talking about? And before that, what is the importance you say before we begin there? What is the importance you say that why the world and also Indians should learn about these important places before historical places?
Good. Well, as I said that India has lot of hidden treasures. The treasures which are not really known even to the Indians right now. And the world should know about what kind of knowledge treasure we have. And I just would like to repeat a very small example rather, which I said earlier that I read Dan Brown, and in a Dan Brown's one of the novel Lost Symbol, the hero asked his guru that where are we heading after 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20, 50 years down the line, where we are will be going with this advances in technology. His guru says, no, we are not going ahead. We are going actually back. And when he said that we are going back, he referred the India. He talked about the Advaita Siddhanta. He talked about the Indian knowledge and all. Any philosopher can write this. It's okay. But when a novelist like Dan Brown writes this, so it has some importance, and that has a meaning. India has lot of hidden treasures which should come out and let people can understand that so many years back, thousands of years back, from where this knowledge has come. That's the whole. I think in today's what I would like to tell is basically these are the hidden treasures.
No, you made a great point because we learn from the past because nobody has seen the future. And sometimes that past becomes the ideal or the goal. like you said, mentioned Advaita, Dvaita, Vishishta Dvaita, Achintya Bheda Bheda. So many philosophical aspects are there. Now, today we are talking about Panchamabhut Mandir and then Anamakula Kannadi. And also we are talking about the Sedi Bhuvalai, three different aspects. So first of all, we'll begin with the Panchamabhut Mandir in India. What is the significance and where are they located before we start off?
The Pancha Mahabhuta concept is an Indian concept. Pancha Mahabhut is basically the five elements.
Correct.
So anything which is made in this world is basically from this five elements. And those five elements, which we generally refer, are air. We call it Vayu, Prithvi, Akash, Jalan, Agni. This means air, earth, ether or space, water, and fire. These are the five elements. Now, in India, we have temples, Shiva temples, for all these five elements. And the first temple, that is Kalahasti Mandir, that temple is situated in Andhra Pradesh. Rest four temples are located in Tamil Nadu. This Kalahasti Mandir is a very old ancient temple which is called Dakshina Kailasa. So, like Kailas, Shiv's or Shankara's the ultimate place. So it is basically called as a Dakshina Kailasa Mandir. It is very close to Tirupati Devasthanam, and it is now under the Tirupati Devasthan Development Trust and all. This represents the air element of five elements, Vayu. Beauty of this is, temple is very big and large. It is quite old, and in a Garbhagruha of this temple, generally we call it as a sanctum sanctorum. So, sanctum sanctorum of that temple, there is a white Shankara Lingam, that Shiva Lingam, white color. Why? Because it is it's air. So air is not basically there. So the for the puja, for the worship, is another idol is basically kept there. Beauty is, there is a lamp inside this Garbhagruha or sanctum sanctorum, and the flame of this lamp is always flickering. Now, those who have visited the very old ancient Indian temples, they might be aware that the inside, Garbhagruha we call it, or Sanctum Sanctorum we call it, there is a very small place. There is no place to air to come. It's all built by the basically everywhere. It's built by the stones and all. And when we go inside, the main priest of this temple even shuts down the door. In spite of shutting down the door, in spite of this closed chamber sort of, this jyoti, that is this flame of the lamp, is always flickering. So people believe that because it represents the vayu, that is air, that's why we do not know from where the air is coming, but that jyoti, that flame, is basically flickering. As I said, that this is a very old temple, and even Adi Shankaracharya had visited this, and Adi Shankaracharya had mentioned that this temple and Bhakta Kannappa, which is basically related to this temple, in his Shivananda Lahari. Shivananda Lahari is a well-known book. Therein he has basically mentioned this Kalahasti temple. Around 125 kilometers south to this temple, there is another temple called Ekambareshwara temple. This Ekambareshwar temple represents earth, Prithvi element. And this Ekambareshwar temple is also very old temple. And on this temple, the Shivalinga is basically made by sort of sand, because it represents the earth. And that's why Abhisheka is not performed on the same lingam. For Abhisheka, different idol is basically there. The third temple, which represents the ether, Akasha Tattva, that is ether or space element, that is around 175 kilometers south to this temple. That temple is called Tilai Nataraja Mandira. This Tilai Nataraja Mandira is located in Chidambaram. This Ekambareshwar Mandir is located in Kanchipuram, and this Tilai Nataraja Mandir is in Chidambaram. In this temple, wherein the Shivalinga is supposed to be there, that space is open. Nothing. There is nothing. Only some golden ornaments the priest generally puts, and there is a red cotton which they kept it like that. During the puja and during the worship, during the arti, they just remove this this cotton, and then we worship this basically linga, which is not seen to us because it is representing the ether or space element among those five element or this Pancha Mahabhuta. This Tilai Nataraja Mandir, generally it is called that Shiva and Uma, Shiva Parvati, have danced together in this temple. So there are a lot of carvings are there, wherein the Shiva and Parvati are basically, dancing. Various dancing poses are there. But Nataraja is only at one place. The Nataraja, Ardhanari Nateshwar, that Nataraja concept of Shiva is basically is at only one place. Very close to this Tilai Nataraja Mandir. Tilai Nataraja Mandir is on the banks of Kaveri, and Kaveri basically meets there in the sea. So that Kaveri Delta, few years back, around 20-25 years back, there was a lot of there was a big excavation, and in that excavation they found that this place was called, even today it is called Pumpuhara. It was a port. It was very richest port once upon a time. And when they go inside the sea, they found out that a very well articulated, a very well placed kind of a city was there, and they found a lot of cities elements they found out within that sea. So this Pampohara was a very rich port, very rich cultured city was there long back, few thousand years back. So when we talk about these temples are, someone says that it is built by Chola dynasty, Pallava dynasty, and then Vijayanagara, but they all have made some maintenance of it or built the Gopuram. Gopuram is basically gateways for these temples. But as regards to this Sanctum Sanctorum is concerned, or the Garbhagruha is concerned, the main temple is concerned, no one is sure that when they were built. It is certain that they were built more than 2000, 3000 years back. That's how we got some kind of some proofs that they are made in 2000, 2500 years back. Now, I was just telling you about the three temples and all. There are so many thousands of temples in India. What's the beauty of it? What's the major part in this telling you all about these temples? The most important part of these temples is that out of these five elements, these three temples, which are, one is, their distance wise, they are around 300 kilometers, first and third among them. They all are in the straight line. That's very important. They all are built in a straight line. One can go and find out the longitude. Now, science is very advanced. One can go to the temple site and we can get that coordinates, longitude, latitude. Latitude are different. Longitude of all the three temples is 79.41 E. All of them. Now, it is surprising. These temples, the Garbhagruha I'm talking, the Sanctum Sanctorum I'm talking, these were built around thousands years back, definitely more than 2000, 3000 years back. In those days, how could they build a temple which are, spread across to some 300 kilometers apart in a straight line? So what kind of cartology they had with them? Whether they had any contour map with them and all? Because not only cartology, they must have some contour map or something like that with them. But it is there. And then I was a bit surprised. I said that we always talk about the Pancha Mahabhuta, and the five elements, and only three elements are in straight line. Remaining two elements, the two temples which represent the remaining two elements, that is the water and fire, they are Jambukeshwar Mandir. Jambukeshwar Mandir is near Trichy. They are not south, they are little right side. We can say the little west side. And this Jambukeshwar Mandir is representing this water. It is in near Trichy. And the last one, Arunachaleshwar Mandir, and that temple, Arunachaleshwar temple, represents the fire. And that temple is also, as I said, that the other side. Now I was surprised. Why 3 and 2? Then I was, when I was digging the ancient knowledge, I was told, or I'd seen that long back, the concept was only three bhutas were, or three elements were there. The three elements were air, earth, and ether. All the three you can't see. Earth you can see, we can see, you and me can see. But earth is what wherein we are sitting. But that's not earth. Earth is a total earth in shape that we can't see. One cannot see standing on the surface that what is the actual earth. And that's why with that concept, now air we can't see, the space we don't know what space, I mean, in the sense that we can't really see the space. So all the three elements were considered as the basic elements, and initially only three elements were considered as the basic elements. And then the elements which were, which are visible, like water is visible, fire is visible, these two elements are added later on. So this is amazing. This is marvel that around 2000, 2500, 3000 years back, the temples were built. Our ancestors have built those temples in a straight line, and then two temples which are making some angle with this straight line. There must be some meaning out of that. We are unable to decode this. Someone has to decode how and why the temples are built in such a fashion, in such a manner. Unfortunately, we are unable to decode this at this moment. And that's why I wanted to highlight this, that these were the five element temples which are built by our ancestors with some kind of message they wanted to give, something they want to say. Unfortunately, we are not in a position, or not able to understand the message which was given by our ancestors. So that's basically I wanted to say about this Pancha Mahabhuta temples.
There's a very famous shloka in Bhagavad Gita, Bhumir Apanalo Vayu Kammano Buddhirevacha
Yes.
Ahankar Ityame Bhinna Prakriti Ashtada. So total 8 elements, but 5 are physical.
Five are physical.
So Kam, Mano, Buddhi, there are 3 additional elements, so total 8. But for the other 3, you have to get into metaphysical level, and that is a realm of yoga. So another one which is which you mentioned is Aranmula Kannadi, which you said, the
Yes.
metallic mirrors.
Yes.
And so one thing I must dispel, and I always challenge the Bronze Age, Iron Age, all these descriptions about the Western academics looks very originating as a nescience, more like a designation, but it's not a fact, because all metals were known to the Manushya for a very long time, to human beings. So just to categorize that this is Iron Age, this is Bronze Age, as if those metals were not being used. Gold has been the currencies, at least I know, from the Ramayana period. Even Ayodhya's currency was called Nishk, and Mahabharata also currency was called Nishk. So between Ramayana and Mahabharata period, the currency has been the same.
Yes.
So I would like to dispel that. Just the currency is different. So what is it? What about that? What about this place?
Yeah. Again, as I said, that there are certain things which are not really known to us and to the world in a larger extent. Like that, there is Aranamula Kannadi. Aranamula is basically a place in Kerala. And the Kannadi is basically the Aranmula Kannadis are basically the mirrors, but mirrors are not the conventional mirrors which are made by glass. These mirrors are made by metal, and that's the beauty of it. This Aranmula is around 116 kilometers from Kerala's capital, Tiruvananthapuram. And this Aranmula is basically known for many things. There is a huge and large temple called Aranmula Parthasarathi Temple. For Vaishnava and all those days, this Aranmula Parthasarathi Temple, which is for Lord Krishna temple, was very well known, and people used to visit that temple in a large number. Aranmula is also known for the snake boat race. Whenever we talk about the Kerala has the boat race sports, and which is very well known. It is one of the symbol of Kerala. Aranmula is basically known for that. Aranmula is known for its Veg thali and so many other things. But above all, Aranmula is known for its metallic mirrors, which are called Aranmula Kannadi. Generally, when we make the mirrors are basically by having the silver nitrate and sodium hydroxide in a liquid form. When we give little heat and with added some some sugar, and with that give the heat and all, then with that glass, and then we give the mercury coating and all, and then the mirror is created with various nowadays lot of technologies, and we make the mirrors much better, brighter, and uh, look quite excellent. Belgium mirrors are known in the world for this. Generally, these kind of mercury coating mirrors, first mirror that way, officially, it has been written that in a German person called Justus Liebig, he has created this mercury coated mirror in 1935. But prior to that, mirrors were basically used in different forms in various parts of the world, not only in India, but even China and even Turkey and many places. They found actual the proof. In India, the ancient temples, sculptures, when you find that a lady or girl is taking a mirror in her hand. That kind of that sculpture was well known, very famous in Khajuraho or many other places. You will find some similar kind of thing. This means that mirror was used in India long back, but here the thing is different. Here there are few people, only few people, who can make a mirror from the metal, and the metal is so bright, so nice, so reflecting, that that mirror can compete, and not only compete, in some cases even can par excellence than the Belgium mirrors. And mirrors which are made by metal, that kind of art is only available in India, and that too also in this Aranamula. You will not find anywhere in the world that similar kind of metal mirrors are available. That's why they are in great demand. They have the GI tag, and everyone wants to have that. They're quite expensive also, because only manual process they are made. Even today, like I referred earlier also, that in India we have called a iron pillar, Lohastambha. Even in 21st century, we are not really known that what kind of alloy was used in this uh, iron pillar, Lohastambha, that it is exposed to all the weathers since last 1600 years or 1700 years, and still there is absolutely no rusting on that pillar. Like that, we are still not aware about it. So metallurgy was so advanced in those days. Similarly here, It's not in history. Now people are making it. So there is basically a family which has this kind of secret of making the metallic mirrors. And this actually family came to Aranmula by the invitation of the then king, long back around 600, 700 years back. It came to Aranmula, and it was basically to make some decorations in this Aranmula Parthasarathi temple. After that decoration work is over, they gave a one kind of ornament to the king, and king liked that, and king said that you start making a mirror like this, and then they started making the mirror. Only this technology as such is confined to only few family, only few people who are aware about it, who can make such kind of Aranmula Kannadi, these kind of mirrors. People say that they are from copper and tin, some different alloys there. Now, how they make the alloy, how they make the mirror, not known to the people. But all mirrors are manually made, and generally 2 weeks are, 2 weeks are required to make a dozen of mirrors. So one can understand that how much time it's required to take mirror, but it's very expensive. All the mirrors which are they are making, all are booked, and particularly in Europe, there are a lot of people who would like to have these mirrors. Now, again, I say that this kind of marvel technology or technological marvel we have with us. We are using, our people are using some kind of alloy which is not known to the world, because except this Aranmula people, no one else in the world could manufacture similar kind of best quality mirrors which can compete, not only compete, as I said, that even far better in some extent than the Belgium mirrors. So there must be something in Indian kind of technology which is making these kind of metallic mirrors the great in the world. Like that, as I said, that there are various marvels are available, technological marvels, ancient knowledge marvels are available in India. And then
one of the historical things I would like to add here is
Yeah.
that when we Damascus steel,
Yes.
people do not know it has come from Utkrisht Dhatu, because all the swords in India are made from that alloy. So, I have a sword in my house which is dated to be 300 years old, and it has never lost its sharpness, never. And believe me, I use it regularly on my trees sometimes, not to kill the live tree, but on the dry wood. And it has never lost it. And the beauty of that is that you cannot bend it. You have to melt it to bend it. So the elasticity is so high that if you hit it, there's a rebounder. It's not going to bend it. So it requires a little heat to bend it. Otherwise, and it is not brittle. It doesn't break. So it's called Utkrisht steel, and that technology is still there in India because the iron pillar is made from that. And it always keeps shining. I have no idea what polish is there. Nothing. I don't have to do anything. If I were to use any Western sword or anything, it will rust in few years. Even if you have a stainless steel also starts showing the dots of rust, unless in any utensil you can see. So that is the technology. It's called Damascus steel, but actually the historical records show that they took it from India and they started melting in the entire chemical formula.
Correct.
So brings to the next topic that we have, and one thing I could not get is the location of this area. Exactly the location. Can you repeat that for people, please?
You're talking about Aranmula?
Aranmula.
Yeah, yes. Aranmula is in Kerala.
Kerala,
and it is in 116 kilometers far from capital Tiruvananthapuram.
Is it on the east, on the west side?
It is on the northwest side of Tiruvananthapuram.
Northwest. Okay. So that is
near Sabrimala.
Near Sabrimala.
Near Sabrimala. Yeah.
That means in the mountains there.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Mahindra. So,
Yeah.
and the third is Seri Bhuvalai.
I think Seri. I also mentioned about the first theater in the world.
Uh,
So I just would like to quickly take that another treasure which we have, probably not known to the world, and then I will quickly go to the Siri Bhuvalai,
correct,
right?
correct.
Yeah. So generally people say that, or people think that the dramatics or this drama, theater, this art has come from Greece, or Greece was the only place from where the this theater art went to the world. But we have a solid proof which basically debunk this kind of idea or this kind of myth also, that in India we have a cave. Well, it is cave is in different shape altogether. This cave is in a state called Chhattisgarh. Chhattisgarh is basically a state with lot of dense forest and a lot of hillocks and uh, like that. In this state of Chhattisgarh, the capital is Raipur. From 280 kilometers from this Raipur, in the Sarguja district of Chhattisgarh, there is a cave. This cave is nothing but a small theater. It has a complete theater structure. It has a stage, and it has a place wherein people can sit on ascending, descending order, whatever you may call. Total around 60 people can can sit there to watch any drama, and there is a stage also. And the size of this cave is around 44 feet to 20 feet. And generally, when in a cave which is closed enough, when you speak something or anyone can speak something, there is an echo. So they have created some windows, sort of, or ventilators, sort of, by which the noise suppression or the echo suppression has to be there. So echo shouldn't be there, and that's why for no echo they have made these kind of structure also. And not only because of that the structure and all is there, and we are calling it as the first drama theater in the world. There are some inscriptions on the wall, and it has been written. Some kind of poetic lines are there. These poetic lines are written in basically we call it as a in a Brahmi script and a Pali language. Long back we have the Brahmi script. The different scripts are there. So Brahmi script and Pali was the language. So it has been written there. And a German scientist, we call it, or a German person who was very interested in Indian culture, Indian knowledge, and all. And he was archaeologist as well. His name is Dr. T. Block. Dr. T. Block visited this site long back, around 35, 40 years back. He did some carbon dating of those whatever written and whatever he could found there. He said that this basically whatever this cave is, this cave is at the is during the great king Ashoka's tenure. That's around Ashoka was 272 to 232 BC before Christ. So around 2300 or 2200 years back. But the other kind of proofs we found that there are there is another cave also there. There are two caves. One cave is Sita Bengara cave. Another is Jogimar cave. Two caves are there close by. They say that the Jogimar cave is basically as a used as a makeup room and all, which is very close by. And actual dramas were performed in that Sita Bengara Gufa or Sita Bengara cave. And now people have started accepting, yes, that yes, around 400, 500 years before the Christ, we had this cave wherein the dramas were played, because they found various proofs, various written on the walls of this cave. So the theory which people were making, that drama and such kind of arts have come from Greece to India, because Greece was the only place, well cultured place, wherein the art went to the world. But that is wrong. Prior to that, because when Alexander came to India much later, around again uh, around say 2200 or 2300 years back. But I mean, actually, Alexander 328 to 330 years BC. That was basically the Alexander's visit to India during that period. Kalidas was much later, but Kalidas also visited this, and it has been told that Kalidas has written the Meghadutam in this cave itself. My point here is that it is always told that as regards to culture, as regards to arts are concerned, we were much behind, we didn't have much with us. When it comes to theater, when it comes to art, when it comes to dramatics, we talk about the Sant, we talk about Shakespeare, Shaw, Ibsen, Chekhov. They all are great. I read most of them. I like their plays. They are nice, they are great, no doubt about it. But Bharat Muni also has written the dramatics when long back, 500 years back, 500 years before the Christ, Bharat Muni has written the dramatics. It was very huge grantha, very huge book he has written. Bhas, 400 years or 300 years before the Christ, he has written a lot of dramas. Unfortunately, these dramas, whatever he has written, were not known to us up till when? Up till 1912. 1912, a great scholar, T. Ganapati Shastri, when he was trying to find out something on a matha in a Travancore state, in 1912, he found the manuscript sort of, or written in Tadapatri, of all the 13 dramas, 13 plays written by Bhasa, all in Sanskrit, but written in Malayalam script. Till the time we didn't know about the Bhas, we only knew that yes, Bhas was a great dramatist who was there. So we had this art, and not only art, the way Bharat Muni has written Natya Shastra, that is the dramatics, in a very scientific manner. But while writing that, Bharat Muni is not claiming that he's right. He's giving this information in the first time. He's not saying that. He's not talking about that. This means that the Natya Shastra or this dramatics was in India even much before that. Panini, now Panini is basically known for his grammar of Sanskrit. So he's written the grammar for Sanskrit. Panini has mentioned about Shilali and Krushashva, about the dramas. Panini was even 400 years before the Christ. Point here is that we had this. We had the great culture, great art, and we were much ahead than the world. Indian thinking, Indian culture, Indian art was much ahead. Unfortunately, that was not recognized. And like the Sita Bengara cave, like this Jogimar cave, they all were literally hidden. And now we have to tell the people that go and visit those caves. When I was giving my lecture in a place called Raipur 2 years back, I was describing about this Sita Bengara caves and all. After my lecture, one person came and met me, and he said that he was one of the great director of dramas and theaters in Raipur. He was, I mean, he's basically a well-known person. Up to a national level, his dramas, he's basically plays. He said that he took his team, he took his group to play a drama in that cave, and he said that whatever you said, that those windows sort of, or ventilators which are there to suppress the echo, they are not only for that. Therefore, that okay, echo is suppressed, but the additional part is with a fire light, fire light. You can make, can just show and then again remove that. By doing that, you can have an effect like a spotlight. So in a today's drama, we can have, in today's theater, we can have a spotlight. Similar effect can be generated in that cave just by putting that firelight, mashal, we call it in Sanskrit. It's there on the window, and then again take it off like that. So I mean, that kind of great art we had with us. So that's what I just wanted to say, that yes, we had such similar kind of even art. I mean, we talked about the science, we talked about this, but even art also we had in a great manner.
Actually, the civilization of European arts started after 1838. Before that, because I went to a museum in Rio de Janeiro 2 years back, and I actually saw the Tribhanga, like Krishna's Murti, but in a Greek sculpture and
Ah,
without clothes. So he's holding a flute. I'll show you some pictures sometimes. And I was
ah,
shocked that how come they were a young boy holding a flute, standing in Tribhanga form, like Krishna is standing, in a
yes, yes.
Greek sculpture. And
Mm,
so the art is always there, but the beautification of art, like in the Vedic culture, even the murtis are fully clothed,
mm,
and that beauty, the respect to the body, that they learned from India. Before that, there was nothing like that. So
mhm,
the concept was birth suit. Whatever you're wearing a birth suit, and that's the ideal way of showing the beauty. And so they had to artificially make up bodies like they will be imagine an ideal world,
mhm,
uh, because the Greeks were very fat and stocky. And if even today, I mean, if you go there, you'll find that people don't have the best possible health because of their diet.
mhm,
And but they had to show in an ideal world, and therefore the most of the colonized world, especially India, they were shown the Greek goddess. Even the English, they use the Greek gods and goddesses, which is an artificial imagination of a mind on a perfectly healthy body. The real bodies are not
yes,
like that. So
yes,
that was the whole thing. uh,
yeah.
so great information. Do you want to add anything to it, like purpose, like something related to that? What was the time period of these, all the three places generally?
Uh, you would like me to cover the Siri Bhuvalai, or only on
all
these
three
three
all
places?
three areas, like the Panchabhut temple, what is the timelines of that, and the Seri Bhuvalai, all three areas.
Okay, Siri Bhuvalai, I just wanted to add another, the last thing very quickly.
Correct.
In a 5 minutes, I would like to add that Siri Bhuvalai is basically a book, a grantha, a book, for which the first Indian president, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, said that it is the earth wonder of the world. Now, what's great in this book? This book is basically written, this Granth has been written by a Jain Muni Kumudendu, in the 8th century when he was in Karnataka. Those days, Karnataka was ruled by Rashtrakut dynasty. So, in the Rashtrakut dynasty, Samrat Amogha Varsha Nrupatunga first was ruling, and the period was year 820 to 840. During this period, this book was written. Book's name is Siri Bhuvalai or Shri Bhuvalai, but they call it Siri Bhuvalai. Now, what's great about this book? Okay, let me tell you about what's great about this book. But let me tell you how this book has, come into this all talk down. This book was somehow, copied by long back Mallikabbeji during the Rashtrakoot dynasty itself. Mallikabbeji, one lady who copied down the entire book, and then she gave it, she offered it dedicatedly to her guru Maghanandini ji. Somehow from the Maghanandini ji, this Siri Bhuvalaya book came after the ages, and then it came to person called Dharanendra Pandit. Dharanendra Pandit could decode this book up to a certain extent. He liked that book, and everywhere he started giving lectures on this book. He was from a very small village. Village name is Doddabelle. It is in between Bangalore and Tumkur in Karnataka state of India. It's a very small village. By attending his lecture, one person called Yellappa Shastri, he liked that idea, that he was very excited about the book. He came to this Doddabelle. He married with the niece of Dharanendra Shastri ji. And when 1930, in the year 1930, when Dharanendra Shastri ji died, Dharanendra Shastri ji's son wanted to sell even this book, whichever he was having with him. This Yellappa Shastri bought this book by selling the golden ornament of his wife. And then he became the owner of this book. But when he became the owner of this book, he could not able to decode this book. And this book was very exciting to him. Then in 1927, Karamangal Sri Kanthaiya ji was a person who was a freedom fighter. He came to Bangalore, and then he tried to help this Yellappa Shastri. And then they also, somehow got another person called Ananta Subbarao. Ananta Subbarao was basically a technical person. He was a person who has created the first Kannada typing machine, typewriter, Kannada typewriter, long back. 1953, they somehow publish some portion of this book in Kannada. And then it was known to the people about, people started knowing about this book. Now, what is great about this book? Generally, books are written in alphabets or alphanumerical kind of thing, whatever maybe you call it, alphabets or something like that. This book is written by numericals only figures 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like that. And those figures, those numbers are in 27 by 27 square, like Sudoku we have. Similarly, 27 by 27 square, we have different numbers. And these numbers are from 1 to 64. The numbers are from 1 to 64. There is no 0, there is no 65 onwards. 1 to 65, 1 to 64 numbers only. Now, what's great about this book? As I said, that every page is only 27 by 27 Sudoku kind of square, and various numbers are there. And on top of that page, one Sanskrita shloka is written. That Sanskrita shloka gives various bandha. Bandha means formation, patterns. So in this 27 by 27, there's total 729 squares are there. In that square, so many squares, one can make, based on that Sanskrit shloka, one can make some pattern. And when you can collect the digits from these patterns, you can decode in your alphabet, whatever language you want to, because the patterns are as per the language. Example, suppose as per the Sanskrit shloka, suppose English is the language, and in an English language we want to decode, and they given the bandha or that pattern like a triangle, like a size, like the way we write the A without in between. So if this kind of pattern is there, and the numbers are 23, 9, 14, and 4. So 23 represents W. In alphabets of English, 23 represents W. 9 represents I. 14 represents N. And 4 represents D. So wind. So you read wind and then you go ahead like that. Like that, this book in a one page itself, you can have in around more than 18 scripts, like English is Roman, Kannada script is different, Malayalam script is different, Prakrit, this Devanagari script is different. So there are 18 scripts and 718 languages. One can read that book. So you can just go on creating the formations, and then you will find something. There are 1270 pages are there, but unfortunately, we have got only 1270 pages. The total book had 64,000 pages. We have only 1270 pages. And in 1270 pages, every page has these kind of patterns and various bandha and all those things are there. So the same 23, 9, 14, 4 in a different formation, if you take those numbers, the 14 may sound different. 14 may have some different meaning in probably in different language, in Gujarati or in Malayalam, in Kerala, like that. So we can have different patterns, we can have different kind of language. And through that, there are hundreds of books, grantha, are there in this one book. We have Jaina Grantha, we have Bhagavad Gita, we have Ramayana, we have Mahabharata, we have Ayurvedic books. We have so many things inside this. This is an encyclopedia. Like Encyclopedia Britannica, this Encyclopedia Indica, we may call it. This is marvelous. And now people are trying to decode it. Believe me, they're trying to get these kind of various patterns, trying to find out various patterns, and still very difficult to decode. We do not know how to decode this. There are a lot of IT professionals are working on one or two institutions in India only on this book just to decode it. In 21st century, we are in 2021, we are facing great difficulty to decode this book. And now you can and I can imagine that on the 8th century, during 820 to 840, Muni Kumudendu, how he had created this book, from where he has got all this knowledge. When did he learn all the scripts? When did he learn how to put it in that? Just creating 7 by 7 Sudoku, it's a problem for us. And then this Munishri has created such a wonderful book, amazing book, and which is indeed, like Dr. Rajendra Prasad said, it is the earth wonder of the world. Unfortunately, this information is also not spread among the world. We all should go inside that. We all should try to work on that, try to debug this. There might be some treasure must be there, something else must be there. The knowledge which is there at the time of 8th century, 9th century, how people were trying to putting it down and all. We probably might be aware about it, but unfortunately, only 1270 pages are there. But in those 1270 pages, we do not know. I mean, when we can decode that. Slowly, we are trying to do that. It's taking time, and only in few languages we are able to decode that. But it says that more than 700 languages one can decode that. This means that Munishri might be aware about so many languages. This is amazing. So my point in today's discussion was, we had a lot of hidden treasures in India, and we do not know from where this great knowledge has come to India. So there must be something which has, like, again, I had tried to refer the Dan Brown book and that Guru, that there must be something there in the which is a great knowledge repository was there. Unfortunately, it's not reaching to us due to n number of reasons. So we must have to crack down. We must have to decode all those things, just like that. Those Panchamahabhuta temples. How, I mean, some message there our ancestor wanted to give us. We are not able to really decode that. So we all have to try to work on this direction. That's what my submission.
So the information is definitely coming from Vedas, and rishis who are following Vedas have definitely created all these archaeological and astronomical and also cultural wonders based on the ancient science. So we can always say that the Vedic culture has always been scientific, and of late Indians are told that it is a dogma because their theology is dogma. Most of the Abrahamic faiths are dogmatic. There is no science behind them. Actually, there is no innovation, include right from numbers to letters. Nothing has been invented by either Europe or Middle East. Everything has come from India. We can safely say that, and historically proven also. So, but the
Yes.
point is that the Indians have to reclaim it. They have to say that they own it. And if they don't do that, then the Western world will keep making their fun and just questioning everything. They question everything but copy everything. Why do they do that? So big plagiarism. If Indian government files a international case against United Nations and all the other countries, then definitely they'll win.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Prashant Polji. It's always a pleasure. And thank you for sharing this information. Nobody knew it. I did not know. And for the viewers who watched it, if you like to see this video again, go to the YouTube channel, subscribe over there, and do comment. And we'll be shortly starting a super chat series. And so you can also do live chat with me on once a month. I will take out time for that. So let's do that. Namaskar and thank you.
Thank you.